My name is John Clark. I'm a posture alignment specialist, and what that means is you can think of it like a sub-niche of physical therapy. It's a holistic approach to physical rehabilitation, and basically we work to restore proper alignment to the body through corrective exercise. So you asked if I was a chiropractor. I take kind of the opposite approach. Rather than forcing the bones back into place, I take a step back and I think, well, why might that bone be out of place? What moves bones? And that's muscles. And so if muscles move bones, maybe if we retrain the muscles in a certain way, we can get the bones back from this type of position up to this type of position, right? And also retraining the mental pathways that go into the neural pathways that control the muscles, right? The muscles don't just go randomly. There's a framework behind how things move, why things move the way they do. We'll get into the psychedelics aspect of this in a little bit. I am going to first talk about why I do this type of stuff. So when I was 17, I broke my back in a skiing accident. I spent the next 16 years in pain before, ever worsening pain, ended up in a wheelchair, all types of stuff, before I found posture therapy. And about 2 months into posture therapy, I stood up out of my wheelchair for the first time in several years, at least without assistance, without a walker. Soon I was walking into gas stations, grocery stores, and things like that. But eventually I didn't need the wheelchair to get around and do like basic functionality. But I was still in lots of pain after 2 years of posture therapy. Still in lots and lots of pain, and that's where the psychedelics came into it for me. And I went to the psychedelic experience combining this posture therapy with psychedelics, and had a very profound experience that allowed me to progress quite rapidly afterwards. So basically in January 2019, I was 425 pounds, not really moving around much, and I was still probably close to 400 pounds by the time I found the psychedelics and stuff. But 6 months after that, I wasn't getting around very well. 6 months after that, I hiked 9 miles competing in a disc golf tournament. So it was a very rapid progression once I combined these two modes of therapy for me. And it took me a while to figure out what exactly was going on with that. Now, this is where I'll kind of take a turn onto something that you may not think is that connected with posture, but we talk about the way we experience reality. So we never actually experience reality at all. What we experience is a nice approximation of reality. We experience a facsimile, a model of reality that our brain has built for us. We don't experience sensory information in its raw form. Even when, if I take this and start moving it across, you're not actually seeing the bottle move across. Your brain quickly knows what a bottle of water is. It knows how to predict how something moves in a line. And until it stops moving in a predictable fashion, your brain is, for the most part, hallucinating that movement. It's creating the expectation. It's always creating a prediction of the model that it's using your model of reality to create predictions based on the sensory input it's receiving, or it had just received and it expects to receive in the next moment. The only things that make it through to your cognition are things that don't match that model. So we've never really seen, touched, heard, smelled, tasted anything directly, because it's always filtered before we become aware of it. And this can be applied to the physical senses in terms of proprioception. So this isn't one of the five senses that we normally talk about, but it is a very real sense that we have. And proprioception is our body's idea, is your brain's idea of how you're situated in three-dimensional space. So how much your limbs are bent, right? You can do something like this and catch a bottle without looking at it. My brain predicted the path, and then it knows where my hand is. It knows where to move the hand, all based on proprioception. And this goes into a larger thing called body schema, which is your brain's model, internal model of how your entire body is supposed to move, what limitations of ranges of motion you have, what emotions you might have regarding how your body moves. All types of things go into body schema. And this is just another model that our brains build for us. So what I believe happens is when we start combining these corrective exercises that are designed to, in and of themselves, alter the body schema over time. We make little changes every day, and using this specific framework of exercise to make changes to how your muscles move your bones, make changes to how your brain controls those muscles, and make changes to how you relate to the force of gravity, all that type of stuff. When we know from, if you've had a powerful psychedelic experience, these visual things that are coming on, that's a breakdown of how your brain processes visual information. If you've experienced something like feeling very long or feeling very small, or perhaps you grab something and your hand starts, that happens to me quite often. I might have something in my hand and it just kind of wants to raise up. And these are all instances of our body schema being altered. So our brain doesn't have, if I'm trying to hold this and my hand just wants to rise up, my brain's having a hard time balancing the position of my hand with the force of gravity and keeping it stable. So it just starts kind of doing whatever it does, right? What we can do then, and this is, I work with people in the non-psychedelic. I do standard posture therapy, and we see great results. But what we can also do is combine these two modalities, and we get a nice 3 to 6 hour window where these models of reality are being fundamentally broken down to their components, and we have a chance to cognitively guide how we build them back up. And that's what I do with these experiences. To give you an idea of what these types of exercises do, Mark, I know you're hearing all of this again, but one of the easiest examples I use to demonstrate what the kinds of problems that posture therapy is designed to solve is if you imagine someone who can't put their shoulder into full flexion. If they have a limitation of this range of motion, but every day they want to put a bottle or a box of cereal or something on a shelf that's just out of their reach, well, they're going to lift their shoulder blade. They can get another inch or so here. I can get another inch or so doing this type of thing, right? And you do that 1 or 2 times, not that big a deal. You do that every single day, and every time you try to lift this thing above your arm or above your head, all of a sudden you're not able to recruit this motion without doing this type of thing. It becomes an ingrained pattern, not only from a physical standpoint, but also from a neural standpoint of alteration to your motor cortex of how and your body schema of how your brain models how your body is able to move. So in standard posture therapy, we would look to lock out those compensating ranges of motion while exercising the dysfunctional range of motion. So if the problem, the problem is the person can't do this, right? But where the pain starts to come in is that they can't do this without doing this. So we want to prevent these ranges of motion from happening when they want to do this motion, right? So a simple exercise that is very commonly used would be something where I might get into a position, oh, okay, that's an that's good. Might get into a position kind of like this, and have someone go, I'm getting sand all over my hand. But if we just, and if they're not able to go very far, I might put them up against a wall and put a block between their hands and the wall and have them just push into the block. But in this position, gravity's not able to, gravity is pulling down towards my back rather than down this way, and the ground is preventing this motion from happening. The ground is preventing this motion from happening, right? And so we have, what? Oh,
all the dirt.
It's just some dirt, not a big deal. But no, so we can apply that same type of framework, locking out compensations, exercising dysfunctions, to all types of different motion patterns throughout the body. And when we are doing that in the psychedelic space, you might be able to imagine how that can amplify the process, speed up the process in terms of breaking down that model and now allowing the brain to realize, oh wait, this is how it's supposed to be happening. Now it's receiving input from the muscles that are supposed to be the primary movers in that job and not receiving input from the muscles that aren't. And that is kind of the fundamental basis of what I do. So there's some interesting things that can happen. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it very similar to like physical therapy?
You can consider it a sub-niche of physical therapy. It's a holistic approach to physical rehabilitation. Often someone comes to me and tells me it hurts to move their shoulder. There's a good chance I'm not going to ask them to move their shoulder. Right? Well, why can't they move their shoulder? Is it possible that if we if I look at, they tell me they can't move their shoulder and their hips are uneven and their foot is collapsed in and one of their knees is collapsed in, well, what happens if we fix those other problems? How might that affect their ability to move their shoulder? So this past weekend, I actually worked with my dad doing this type of stuff. To give you an idea of the interesting kinds of things that can happen, this was maybe like an hour and a half into his experience or so, and I'd taken him through maybe a dozen exercises, and I had him laying on his back with his feet and legs going straight up the wall, bottom of the feet pointing towards the ceiling. And what I noticed was, while one foot was fairly neutral, the other foot was collapsed in like this. And so I put a block around his ankles, put a strap around his ankles, a block between his feet, and the pressure coming in through here and the pressure pushing out here forces both feet to go to a more neutral position. The interesting thing that happened was soon after I did that, he was laying there with his eyes closed and he was seeing all the fun stuff over here, but right here he was indicating his field of view went black. And there was some sort of synesthesia going on between this new way that we'd ask his body to move and how that was affecting what he was processing through his visual cortex. So that's a very interesting way that psychedelics can now allow you to visualize your problems, your limitations in range of motion and things like that in a new way. And so what I asked him to do was start trying to expand that field of vision, right? If the field of vision disappeared as soon as we made this correction, what happens if he just starts trying to make it come back? And what types of things does that make him do? Well, he started imagining circuitry, and that started becoming a part of his vision, and starts going between black and white. And over time, he was in that position for maybe 20 minutes. Over time, he asked me to take the strap and the block off, and he kind of rolls over the side, and his body just kind of takes over. And he said, like, this is what they're telling me to do. And he just starts moving in these kind of stretching in weird ways. And he was noticing that it was not only his ankle that was affected by this, but he felt it in his hip, he felt it in his shoulder. And so this kind of innate wisdom within the body starts taking over. And how are things feeling since then? So I've been working with him for like 2 years almost without psychedelics. This was his first time combining the two. And problems that we've been plateaued with for the last 6 months or so, all of a sudden we're seeing changes in those symptoms, right? So this isn't like what you would want to go at right away. And you need to know these exercises. I'm not going to be trying to teach exercises to someone when they're out in outer space, you know. But seems to be an effective modality for when you kind of peeled off the easy to remove layers, and there are things that are sticking. It seems to be a very interesting way to approach those types of problems. Moderate. Yes. So with him, we went with 2.25 grams. You don't want... You said 2.25? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's important that you're not like... You know, for me, if I go too high, it's just kind of like, you know, like a puddle. Like not much movement's going to be happening. So it's very much wanting to walk this line between, I think getting to the point where you have closed eye visuals is important. If you can walk that line of not having too much open eye disturbances, that's a good thing, because for some of these movements, you need to have your eyes open, you need to be able to position yourself, so there's a safety aspect that comes into play with that type of thing. You don't want to be falling down when you're trying to do a stretch and things like that, or when you're changing positions from one exercise to another. And we're not going after like the types of big, profound emotional things that you're typically going after with like psilocybin-assisted therapy or something, right? We're really going for that part where things just start to feel kind of weird, you know? And that's a good place to go if this is something that someone's wanting to do on their own, is aim for that time. Yeah, if you have experience, if you don't have experience, start low, work yourself up, you know? It'd be better to have probably a bit too little than a bit too much. Yeah, and with psilocybin, once you're on the ride, you better strap in, right? When appropriate, like when you're in some of these positions. Like I've got a YouTube channel. I handed out some cards earlier. I'll hand out some again. Like I've got a YouTube channel where I have lots and lots of these exercises on there. Lots of them are static positions. You know, like that one where he had this kind of breakthrough moment. He was just laying there. You know, there's nothing real active about that besides just trying to keep the quads a bit tight, right? But like a little bit of active engagement in the quads. But besides that, he's laying on his back with his feet up a wall, you know. And that's what a lot of these exercises are. Well, or we might get into a position like that and then do upper body exercises, right? There's lots of ways, especially if we think that there's lower body compensations happening for upper body movements. That's a great way, you know, if this is your upper body, this is lower body. This is again locking out these compensations down here, and now we can exercise the upper body in all types of different ways, right?
Do you have any exercises on your channel specifically for like pelvic tilt? I know a lot of people have like one leg slightly shorter than the other.
Yeah. So that's more like hip elevation, really. So or you can look at it as hip or pelvic elevation. So if I have like one hip higher than the other, that's kind of what you're thinking. Pelvic tilt is, you see that from the side. So a really common one these days is this type of sway back position where the hips are bailed out in front and the shoulders. So because the hips are in front of the ankles, the body wants to fall forward. So you don't fall forward, the body pulls back. And then so you don't fall backwards, the head goes forward. So this is a very common posture these days. And that usually comes along with some degree of anterior pelvic tilt and an exaggerated curve in the lower back. So on my YouTube channel, I've reviewed a book called Pain Free by Peter Goskew, and I found that to be like an accessible way for people. It's more like symptom-based because that's what's easier to market to people. But I don't chase symptoms in one-on-one therapy. I care what people's symptoms are so much as I don't exacerbate them, and I don't ask them to do something that hurts. But there's thousands of potential reasons someone's low back might hurt, right? So it's more, with the tools I have available to me, it makes more sense to take an objective look at how their body is positioned, how they're moving, and work at going correcting those things, see how that affects the symptoms.
I'm John's mom, but a lot of you are young here. I think most of you are now to the left. And so it's interesting to me. Are you here because of pain for this workshop specifically, or anybody came?
Just out of interest? As far as I'm aware...
I was more fascinated about like any chronic sort of issues whatsoever, you know, when anybody's approach to dealing with that.
Mm-hmm.
There's so little help for chronic problems with other medical.
Yeah, especially in the kind of traditional Western approach, there's very little. I have a perfect example of someone who slipped through the cracks of the medical system well, since I broke my back. Just kept on getting worse and worse and worse until I was in a wheelchair, and then they're like, we don't know why you're in a wheelchair. And I'm like, well, am I ever going to walk again? They're like, well, we don't see any reason why you can't, but we don't know how to get you there. You know, so it's a very frustrating thing for people who are in these types of situations. And there's a lot going on in the brain. Like, I did have structural problems. I did have these dysfunction and compensation patterns going on in my body. But then you get the trauma piled up on top of that reinforces those patterns. And it becomes this feedback loop, essentially, right? And one thing makes the other thing worse. And while, I mean, the past 2 years with just doing the posture stuff, we've seen incredible progress with you, right? But when we get...
From not being able to do quite a few physical activities, so this last year I was skiing.
Back skiing,
Yeah, back to skiing. I magically know how to ski.
It's a...
2 knee replacements and, 2 shoulders, what are they called? The rotator cuff.
Yeah, so, and like stories like mine and his are a dime a dozen with this type of work. But when we get to these roadblocks, I think it makes sense to expand the possibilities of what we might be able to achieve.
So I think it was in a book, I wish I remembered which book, but they likened like a psychedelic experience with things like this, like fresh snow on a ski hill.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, normally there's like all these tracks, all these grooves, and then there's a fresh snow on it.
Mm-hmm.
Psychedelics. And then
Yep.
pick your own line.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, we see these things with like ego dissolutions or ego death. Our ego is a model of reality about ourselves and how we and who we believe we are and how we believe we're supposed to interact with other people and other things. that's. I mean, the ego is just another story we tell ourselves. So when you experience that ego dissolution or ego death, now it's easy to go back. Those paths are still underneath the surface; they're not gone, right? And it's easy to go back, but it allows you a distinct opportunity to choose a different path. And it's the same thing with this type of work. It's not like, oh, you do one psychedelic experience and do some posture work and you're magically cured. No, that hopefully we make some excellent progress within those few hours. But that thing we cued into with his ankle, I've had him in that position tons of times. I've never seen that severe that severe tilt in his foot. So I think it was the psychedelic experience was putting into a state where these types of things maybe were more apparent, right? And or maybe the root symptom, maybe the other things that were compensating were more relaxed, and so that dysfunction presented itself more clearly. And because there weren't things in his hip trying to pull it back into the right place. So it provides an opportunity, one, for realizing new potential avenues of treatment. It offers an opportunity to rapidly engage with those, and then the opportunity to keep on engaging them after the experience is over. Just like with we want to find integration habits for maintaining these whatever lessons we learn emotionally or spiritually or mentally in these experiences. You can integrate the physical aspect as well by keeping up with, developing a plan going forward for attacking the problems that may have come up in that session.
I got here a little bit late, so excuse me if you spoke on this already.
Oh, of course.
I'm interested in the piece. You're talking about the importance of having eyes closed so that the visual component is somehow accelerates like the body's healing process.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me because in the Western clinical protocol for psilocybin assisted therapy, they really specifically talk about you have to have the visual component there to connect those parts of the brain that need connecting. That's what does it. And so I wonder what your comprehension is about the importance of the visual component in your work you're talking about.
So I do not believe that these visuals we experience are meaningless necessarily. I believe that it is a representation. I believe it's an advanced form of synesthesia, of operations that are happening in other parts of the brain being processed through the visual cortex. So in this case, what happened with him was, I think, his motor cortex was sending information that would normally be processed by his motor cortex and potentially other areas of the brain now show up in this visual field, this blackening of his field of view. And so at one point he was talking to his hip and asking it to, thank you for protecting me, but your service is no longer needed, and he was imagining the circuitry being rewired, and
you can see that in the pattern on the right side of the patterns you see when your eyes are closed. We didn't have enough psilocybin in me to see them when my eyes were open. That was on purpose. That was intentional. And that way I could see circuitry, literally, those patterns you see lighten up in spots, which I thought was fascinating.
Did you have some conscious control, interacting with
that's what I was doing. Yes, I was feeling things, and I don't know how better to describe it. I was feeling things that would say, you need to stretch this way. So I'd let my legs drop to the right and go into a position that he never considered using, and what he did. So my body was telling me to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah. The interaction with the visuals you're having helped assist that process?
Yeah, so my profound experience, I got a podcast where I talked about this in depth, but when I decided to first combine, I came across mushrooms by chance. It wasn't something I planned out. My CPAP broke, and I found a guy on Facebook Marketplace with one that was similar, and I was talking to him about like everything I'd gone through because we just kind of hit it off. And he goes inside. He's like, "Here, try these," you know. I was like, okay. But I didn't know anything about this stuff. I knew absolutely nothing. I took like a small dose, and I was like, okay. It felt good. Like I felt more relaxed. I could tell that my muscle spasms alleviated a bit, and there were some mild analgesic properties. But I got this idea in my head that I'd been studying posture therapy for about 2 years at that point, like, you know, in a training program and all this type of stuff. So I got this idea in my head I was just going to do as many posture exercises as I possibly could in this window. And what happened for me was, you know, the way the visuals tied in for me, up until that point, like I knew all the exercises. There's several hundred of these things. I knew how to do pretty much all of them, at least all the ones I was physically capable of doing at that point. And I just didn't know what they were really doing underneath the surface. I didn't know the sequencing of these exercises is very important. We have an algorithm that we can follow. Now, you can follow it in many different ways depending on what type of goals you're going after in the body, but we have an algorithm for affecting change. We want to first get the body working more equally on each side of get the left and right sides working more equally. We want to then go after essentially neutralizing center of gravity forward and backwards. Then we want to strengthen from the hips and pelvis out towards the extremities, and then we want to always end these routines with an exercise where we're doing the same thing on each side of the body. So I wouldn't end a routine with an exercise where I'm rotating one direction and then the other direction. I would want to end it where I'm doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. So there is a general framework for this approach. But I didn't understand how the best way I can describe it is it was like puzzle pieces on a table that I didn't know how to put together, right? It was, I could pick up all these individual ones, but I was just haphazardly ordering them. And, no, go ahead.
Just from your experience so far, how often do you think would be good to incorporate the psychedelic component? And is it like every day you're kind of doing these exercises 3 times a day, and then maybe like every 6 months with psychedelics? Or?
Yeah, so that's something that is probably still kind of figuring out. I would say when you hit a roadblock is a good time. But it's like where the visual aspect like really came in for me was I got to this point where I saw like a musculoskeletal system that was doing the exercise I was doing. I would do an exercise, it would do it, and I could like see layers of tissue. I'm not saying it was like completely anatomically correct or anything. I don't really know about that, but it was giving me a different way to view these exercises, and it was I could interact with this thing. I could move it around in different directions. It was a very profound experience for me. And then I asked it what I needed to do, and it would do an exercise. I would do it. And after that, that's when I started making that rapid progress. For 6 months later, I hiked 9 miles in the mountains playing disc golf. It was because from that point forward, I could target an area of my body, make a determination about, or at least a hypothesis about what might be the postural, explanation for that problem, design a routine to go after it, test that hypothesis, analyze the results, and iterate, right? But I needed that, for me, I needed that type of like breakthrough experience to get there. And so I don't think that these things look the same for everybody. I don't think that it's where you want to go right off the bat. It's an interesting thing that seems to be happening that as far as I'm aware, I'm the only person in the world doing this type of work. Right? Like it's not like after working on myself for quite some time.
You're in the laboratory.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Not with the posture therapy, just with the psychedelics, combining them.
I'm very good at posture therapy.
Marrying the two. It was just so like,
I
wow.
know about this through my experience using cash with yoga asana,
Mm-hmm.
meditation, and pranayama, and just having like unbelievable direction and how to to control metabolisms and just all that subtle stuff about everything you're talking about is very familiar to me. It's been powerful for me to use psychedelics and mushrooms also on acid.
Yeah.
Psychedelics, ayahuasca, like yoga asana and ayahuasca, that have like intelligent, loving consciousness moving through you, helping you while and showing you like, hey, do this. Like you're talking about like suggesting postures. And you spend time and then like because there's all traumas in those muscles and there's stories of consciousnesses. It gets really intense.
It does.
It's powerful because you're like remembering early childhood stuff or dreams, or visions. I mean, it gets really intense, but then you get unbelievable healing.
Yes.
Injuries that Western science told me I wouldn't walk right again. I was looking at the sports again.
Tapping into your own body's wisdom.
Yeah, because all the science is in here, but it's like you're talking about creating an environment where that science can work.
Yeah.
Spaciousness, a safe space for that science, that process can be triggered.
Yeah, this isn't like throwing science by the wayside. It's just taking a look at it from a different perspective. This is very much, like you said, we have innate inner wisdom, and our body. I think that somewhere deep down in our brains, that original body schema still exists. It's just not what your brain is actively using, and so I think there is a way to get once you can open up the proper pathways, the brain will start to kind of bubble to the surface, and you start remembering, oh yeah, I did used to be able to put my arm up over my head, right? I mean, so many people who are suffering from chronic pain tell me things like, I don't remember what it was like to not be in pain, or I can't even imagine what my life would be like without pain. Like the pain has become a part of their ego. And so if you've internalized the experience of pain to that degree, it's a very complicated issue of even manifesting the belief that it's possible to live without that. When you have many highly educated, smart, well-intentioned people telling you that they don't know what to do. And they're the authority in our society of how to get better. And that's a very depressing place to be. I can tell you firsthand. Any other questions?
Get your business cards in case anybody wants to the different type of piece of equipment.
Anyone who wants one?
Thank you.
On the back, there's a QR code that takes you to my link tree. So it's got, I don't know if you want one or not.
I kind of missed the first part. Where do you live?
I'm in Albuquerque, but I work with people online. Like my therapist works in California. When I was when I first started in a wheelchair, they got me out of a wheelchair without even being in the state. Oh yeah. Were you here earlier? Out now. There you go. Yeah, happy to talk. I've got like 100 videos on YouTube with various exercises and routines and things like that. I just started a podcast about a month ago that is all about the actual psychedelics and the pain. So that's.
So your name and posture therapy and YouTube.
Posture Monster John is where you find. But on the back there's a QR code. If you scan that, it'll take you to a link tree. It has everything there. Oh yeah, it's just a web page with a whole bunch of links. So it'll tell you here's the podcast, here's YouTube, here's Instagram. So it's one central resource where you can branch out to everything else.
There had to be something in the mystery someplace.
They kind of always associate it like the emotional aspects of things, but
I love that your photos
like,
on here, so I can remember. You don't have to memorize names as much.
I made these. Yeah, I went to MAPS last month in Denver. And
I was thinking MAPS in California.
the big conference that just happened in Denver.
Yeah, the big one. There's like 12,000 people there.
About, the school thing, isn't it called MAPS?
Oh, so Yeah, the organization is MAPS.
Oh,
the,
it's an organization.
the,
Okay.
the conference was Psychedelic Science 2023,
Right.
but that's just kind of a mouthful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like to put my photo on there because if you're at a big conference like that, you meet like.
Right.
Everybody.
I met hundreds and hundreds of people while I was there. I can't remember.
We have a stack of cards and then like spend 2 weeks afterwards.
Yep.
Going, okay, who's that?
Are those Buddhist free grapes? Is
Like, you still have some?
Thank you.
That's amazing. That'll be interesting to see because you're still on your healing journey too.
I'm pretty much out of pain. I'm doing really well.
I know,
Yeah.
but we don't ever stop.
We're never done. Yeah. There's always more.
It'll be interesting to see like what other things you put together that to help people even more.
Yeah, I would eventually like to get into like internal family systems or something along those lines. Yeah.
That's what I do. You can't do psychedelics without internal family systems, in my opinion.
And that's kind of what he was going after the other day when he starts talking to his hip and things like that.
Yeah,
You know,
no,
it's very much.
Did it naturally.
Yeah.
And Schwartz learned it from his patients.
Mhm.
They just started using that language.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's amazing.
Yeah, I interviewed for the podcast just actually yesterday, like right before I left here. I finished an interview with a guy named Payam. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He's a somatic internal family practitioner. He works with a lot of people with chronic pain. But psychedelic as well. And
So somatic, he's mixing somatic, some type of somatic technology
yeah,
with IFS?
somatic experiencing with IFS. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How do you spell Payam?
PAYAM.
Okay, that's interesting.
I'll release that episode next week, probably. So.
So y'all are talking about using IFS with psychedelics?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Uh huh.
Big time.
So internal family systems, is that like how
Can't do psychedelics without
everybody relates to
say
each
that.
other?
No, this is internal. So this is.
Spontaneously happens. Teach us how
Yeah.
to do that naturally without even having a language, and then you discover IFS, you're like, oh, they know about this.
Exactly. It
That's
all
how it happens.
matches up. Yeah.
So you got like the protector side of your psyche. You got like a exiled or repressed side. You got like the firefighters. Yep, the firefighters who were taking. Yeah. So it's about like actually talking to these, which I think is a lot easier in the psychedelic experience because it can feel kind of silly for Westerners to do something like this.
Like the brain family or something?
Yeah. It's just like honoring and talking to different aspects of your psyche. Mm-hmm.
You are, and then everything else is part,
Cynicism.
which is
Mm-hmm.
You can feel the cynicism, and you still like give persona to this thing.
Yeah.
Getting me to now every time I'm about to feel big sadness, like
Mhm.
I feel big sadness, I just give that a persona and start talking to it, even with the
Going all the
cynicism.
way back
Just
to
giving it attention,
Mhm.
like releases charge,
Mm-hmm.
complex.
and it works.
Mhm.
That's what I was doing when I was
And
in
the cynicism is hard
I
too.
was talking to my hip, which is one of my problems. And telling that one muscle that's
A lot
been
of human relations.
messed up for forever, just let go.
The one thing you're
Relax.
never going to be
Don't
able
bother
to
with
do
it
is
anymore. We don't need you anymore. You're working too hard and
I mean,
unnecessary.
you really,
It's
you
interesting
know,
because it seems that
and
this is all
form
trauma
a first
informed,
impression
like
of
whatever that
yourself.
physical injury
Everybody
is,
else does.
it wouldn't
That's right.
be
You
its own
can't,
thing,
yeah,
its
you
own thing
can't
if there
ever
was
You can't
no
ever
trauma.
form your own
And
first
then with
impression of
IFS, they
yourself.
talk about it's like it's from traumatic experiences that these parts are created, and so it's like trauma that like splinters us into these different systems
Mhm.
with different agendas, and then giving attention to sort of like helps it all come back together as one.
It also
Exactly. Yeah.
He also
There's-
talked about maps and the brain builds, for lack of a better word.
The
a map,
models,
the
yeah.
models
Mhm.
that the brain builds. And it's actually neurons firing in your brain. And there's a guy that he interviewed on his podcast. Or no, you just talked about his book.
I want to interview Andrew Gallimore.
He was the guy who did the actual brain work. You know, that he's a neuro.
I mean, yeah, he's advanced some of this. So there's a really good book, talks about these models of reality that we build called Reality Switch Technologies by Andrew Gallimore. Very, very interesting book that is about how
He's a neuroscientist.
he's a computational neurobiologist, I believe. This is very, very fancy. Lots of fancy letters after his name. But he wanted to. He's very interested in DMT, especially. So, like, the DMTX experiments that are happening, where they're doing IV infusions of DMT for up to 90 minutes. Andrew Gallimore, did all the math and essentially wrote the paper on propagating that DMTX technology for how you can keep people in that steady state. But he also wrote this book, Reality Switch Technologies, and it's all about how psychedelics affect the brain. But in order to talk about how the psychedelics affect your brain and these models that we build, first you have to talk about, well, how do you build these models? And
how do you replace them? If you have bad ones.
Yeah, his work was instrumental in finally understanding why this posture and psychedelic stuff was working out so well. I knew that it was working, but I didn't. I was like, well, what's really going on? It took a while to find that type of stuff.
What value does it bring you to have a story to explain what's going on?
I think it makes it more relatable for sure. It's unfortunate that there's not more research, I guess, to really back it up. But
if you're helping people,
yeah, that's what I care about is the results.
Because
and
more credibility if you had some science behind whatever. That
it would be nice if there was a diagnostic code for bad posture, so that people how many people here have ever heard of posture therapy? It's highly completely void of psychedelics. It's a highly effective mode of therapy.
Well, it's really the only thing that ended up helping me when I had hurt my back was stretching a lot and then really just being very serious about my posture all the time. And then once it became regular, then no longer have pain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've helped people 9 years old get out of pain. I've helped people 89 years old get out of pain. It's so much has to do, and that feeds back into their emotional and mental states as well. I hear all the time, once someone gets from walking like this all the time to walking like this, they're like, oh my, I have so much more energy. I have so much. Part of that is metabolic and immuno. There's all types of stuff going on. When your muscles aren't working properly, it's a domino chain effect down the rest of your cardiovascular and metabolic and immune and hormonal systems. There's a long chain of effects that impacts other systems. But it's very common for people to say that my mental health is improving, I'm not as depressed, I feel more motivated, I'm ready to do more things, all these types of things just because now they're staying like this.
Well, it opens up your airway too, and over time can make your airway even larger, and especially if you're breathing through your nose and getting nitrous oxide, where's that?
Or if you're always breathing like this.
The chin back opens up that airway and enlarges it over time.
Yeah, so there's a lot more. It seems kind of innocuous, and anyone can hold themselves, or actually no, a lot of people can't even hold themselves in good posture. But you might be able. How many of you wake up in the morning, you go sit down at your desk, and start okay, I'm going to get all set up, and I'm sitting nice and straight, and you start reading an email, So we can maybe consciously put ourselves into a good thing, but once we stop thinking about it, we're in these other states. And then once that becomes an ingrained pattern within your brain, within your physical structure of your body, that's when it becomes a problem.
And he's got a huge market because all around the world. Yeah. We got a lot of people with problems with their hands. Young people with problems with their hands. Really.
Oh, man. I go to my girlfriend's son's soccer games, and it's amazing how many of the kids are running around like this. They're 13, 14 years old, and their shoulders, their arms are already fundamentally working at a very different level. And they're sitting there like this, a lot of this type of.
It's a whole generation of people just hunched over, head out. How does
hands on the heart.
But that's where it comes from, just right here. Everybody, if you walk around, you see everybody on their phone like this. Pretty soon your shoulders follow, and
It's not that
Kids
there's
on the floor, practically in a fetal position, playing their video games
yeah.
and stuff.
It's not that there's anything wrong with looking at your phone. It's
12 hours a day.
It's what you're not doing when you're not looking at the phone. There's nothing wrong with sitting at your desk and working. It's what you're not doing when you're not sitting at the desk. It's about just adding these corrective things in here and there to balance. Exactly. Finding balance with your environment. Like, we are supposed to be, joints over the ankles and from both the side and the front, right? Like, you can hold a bowling ball above your head here, not that hard. Try holding one right here. Right? It's a very different thing. It's the exact same thing with your head. Mm-hmm. So those forces are being propagated down through your spine, into your pelvis, into your knees, into your ankles, into your toes, just because your head's forward, right?
The one thing you brought up is fascia. You know what fascia is over your muscles? There's one that starts here and goes all the way down to your ankles, to your toes.
I think.
Well, okay, so your bones, your cartilage, your ligaments, it's all fascial tissue. It's just different types of fascia. Fascia encapsulates every organ in your body. Like, we're really like fascia with different things in between it. That's kind of what we really are. But there are like long lines of it. Like, if you look, like if someone comes to me with plantar fasciitis, I'm not looking at their ankles. I'm looking at their knees, at their hips, at their back, their shoulders, their head, because the plantar fascia becomes the Achilles tendon, which becomes the gastrocs, which becomes the hamstrings, which becomes the sacrotuberous ligament, goes all the way up over to the cranial fascia. It attaches above the eyebrow. You can dissect that as one contiguous piece of tissue. It's not this idea of like, just because we name different things, different parts of the body, different things, doesn't mean they're actually separate.
So did you say that you're not aiming for like the large psychological, emotional breakthroughs in the work that you're doing yet?
Yeah. I mean, partially, I think a lot of those come at larger doses, and the larger doses aren't conducive to physical work, at least not for beginners. There's a safety aspect. I don't want people falling down. I prefer there to not be open eye visuals. But also, I'm not a mental health professional, so usually like 1.5 to 2.25 grams, kind of strain dependent, how people react to psilocybin. And you can do it with other substances, but psilocybin is accessible. And
do you work remotely with people incorporating the mushrooms? If they can
so, yeah, I'll work with people online if they have someone trip sitting physically there as well. They're going to need someone to, like, I might have to direct that person, hey, they're in this position, put that strap in their block. So as long as there's someone who can facilitate to their physical needs in the space and keep them safe, yeah, I'm happy to guide. Like, I'm happy to guide people wherever I can.
All of his help was through Zoom with a therapist.
Okay.
And this was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
They were doing it that way. So.
Yeah, that was already kind of the standard for this stuff before COVID hit. Was like one-on-one Zoom therapy. But it's obviously a little bit different in a psychedelic space. I don't want someone by themselves on the other end of a Zoom line. Yeah. There's. I mean, safety is like number one. That's like absolute top priority. So I can have a session like training the other person. Here's some guidelines of what types of things I might ask you to do, and what types of things you might be responsible for taking care of. It's not rocket science, right? It's just making sure that we have a appropriate level of safety.
Where would a person go through training for just traditional posture therapy?
So I'm trained by the Egoscue Institute. The guy who kind of came up, I'm trained in the Egoscue method, it's called, which is There's a guy named Pete Agoscu. He was a Marine in Vietnam. The way he tells the story, he zigged when he should have zagged, caught a bullet, and I think that's one of the reasons this has had such a hard time catching on. Like he started developing the stuff in the 70s and started seeing great results, but they just started studying it at Stanford like 5 or 7 years ago. You know, and it's because it came from a Marine, not a doctor. But yeah, he started after the doctors just kind of told him when he got shot, you're just going to be in pain. He's a stubborn ass Marine. he picked up a copy of Gray's Anatomy. He started reading it, and he just started looking at the pictures. He's like, I don't look like this. And why don't I look like this? How can I look like this? And that was kind of the basis of the whole thing right there. Yeah, so my training was online. Honestly, the training is quite minimal. I learned what I learned by doing it, by solving the problems the hard way.
Were you about to say? I thought that like a question interrupted you from finishing the thought that using psychedelics, that the visual component was able to help you put those pieces together because you had learned it but didn't like grok it.
Oh yeah. That was. I think I did. I think I finished it all. Yeah. So like what happened for me was this like marvelous vision of a musculoskeletal system that was doing the exercises I did, and like, it was mimicking me. And then I asked it what I needed to do. It would do an exercise, and I would do it. So that was how that innate healing showed up for me.
Watching an exercise with your body type in front of you.
It was. I'm not gonna say. I don't know what body it was. It was just this musculoskeletal system that was doing exercises, and I would follow. You know.
Without skill, you could follow the muscle.
Yeah. It was like an interactive VR thing. Like an interactive anatomy lesson.
When I was a kid, there used to be these in the encyclopedias. That used to be this like overhead that would pull apart each one of the. You'd see a skeleton and you'd go through the muscles and everything and
I know
stuff.
what you're talking
And I
about.
remember as a kid just thinking that was so fascinating. You know, no computers or anything.
Yeah,
That's what it reminds me of when he says that. What he went through.
I do think that the visual experience is very important. That's why I try to find this line where you get in the closed eye visuals, but not so much that your sense of what's around you is blown out of the water. Because when you're going from position to position, that's going to complicate the process.
You got to have your eyes on.
Yeah, some of these exercises, like one of them is runner stretch, where getting into this position, you can imagine someone in a severely strong psychedelic state, getting them to line up their toe, heel, kneel, toe, and then going up into this position and keeping their spine straight. That's something difficult for at a certain point for for some people. Just doing that in and of itself is nearly impossible. And paying attention to making sure that the back doesn't curve out, and that we're not letting the head do something weird, and keeping the knees locked. So these exercises can be very particular. There can be a lot of things to pay attention to. They're not physically strenuous for the most part. Like, for the most part, you're not going to break a huge sweat, get out of breath doing this type of work. It's just you're going to have to pay attention to what your body's doing and consciously guide and direct how you want your body to work.
You're usually working with muscle groups or specific areas, and so that's the area being exercised. Or another area being not worked because you are working with muscles to let those muscles off the hook. So you end up in a very, different positions, but you're using different muscles in a different way. So you're not doing heavy exercise. You're not doing sit-ups. You're not doing push-ups. You're not doing stuff like that. You're working on the muscles and trying to make them activate the right way and work the right way.
Yeah, we're going after the ones that aren't working right. So even though these positions might be just like static hold or no weight, just weight of gravity, just kind of calisthenic type stuff, they can still be challenging in a way that a lot of people don't expect.
Do you do anything with I like just recently learned about it, and it's pretty wild. Just like everyone should always have like your tongue suction to the roof of your mouth at all times.
So I'm familiar with that type of stuff through like Qigong. Yeah. Yeah. Like if you read Montauk Chia, he's big on having the tongue up against the roof of the mouth.
And it helps you keep your neck like aligned with your spine.
I don't really go too far into that type of stuff. I don't find that it's strictly necessary.
More like large muscle.
Yeah, I try to keep away from things that you have to consciously do throughout the day. I like to. I don't consciously think about my posture throughout the day. It's something that over time, the brain just, once you have full range of motion, all your joints, things should just kind of more naturally sit in that position more often than not. And having good posture isn't like, being a robot and moving like that all day, right? It's very much about being fluid, dynamic, and there's nothing wrong with slouching. You just don't want to be stuck in this position all the time and not be able to get out of it, right? And you don't want to be where this is how I always am. Okay, I can do this, but after 5 minutes, okay, my back's hurting or my legs, right? Like forcing good posture can be painful, or most often is, I've found, because your body has sought out this balance for a reason. This is how it's found to be a productive way to interact with your environment and your daily activities and all these things. You just don't. It's about modifying that balance. Yeah.
Running out of time.
Okay. Yep. Getting close.
The next guy just walked that way, though. So he's got like another 20 minutes. He's teaching. Well, the part in which I'm interested is how you can use various fungi for healing, physical healing. And I think what he's interested in, the guy who's going to teach the class, is his travels going to all the different locations in South America and learning about how you can use mushrooms for healing.
I didn't know that was. It's like the My Magical Journey.
That sounds very interesting.
No, it's
Yeah. Mm-hmm.